Gluten issues? Well, what about a flour that may get around that issue so you can enjoy all those sweet treats that we've all come to know? Well, there's a farmer in Northeast Colorado that's looking at doing just that. Clay Patton on the Rural Radio Network. Had the opportunity now to talk with Roy Pfaltzgrass, PFZ Farms, Haxtun, Colorado. Roy, thanks for being able to talk with us. This conversation actually started back in February at CCTA's High Plains No-Till Annual Conference there in Burlington, Colorado. But that's where we were kind of shooting around ideas, talking about innovations in agriculture. And you were talking about you kind of had the wild idea to try some millet flour, grinding some millet down into flour. So kind of tell us how this idea came about and what you're learning as you're making this millet flour.
The idea originally came from my wife. A number of years ago, back when we were dating, she was having some issues with gluten sensitivities, and it really bothered me that we essentially had to make two meals every time we would. To me, food is community, and, to bring people together and to have two meals is just didn't really fit that. And so I started looking around for different possibilities. I had tried the gluten-free stuff that she was choking down, I think would be the best term for it. It was not very tasty. The texture was usually gritty, pretty rough, and not fond of it at all. So I started, going through. We raise a bunch of different crops on our farm, looking around kind of see what different options we had. And I tried a number of things. Some of them were pretty spectacular failures, but I found some research that said proso millet was a good option for substitution in wheat flour recipes. So that's kind of how we started, and it's been pretty successful. I've been really pleased with what we've had. We haven't had any failures with millet compared to some of the other stuff that we tried. But it just a definite exploration, and we're into it probably at least 3 years with the millet, and slowly developing different mixes and finding ways to make it work to help people out, be able to buy local food and be able to be gluten-free at the same time.
And the good news is, when it comes to the eastern plains of Colorado, southwest Nebraska, western Kansas, millet is a fairly sustainable crop that we continue to see in, year out. But starting at the beginning of this process, because you're milling this out on your farm, you're doing it all right there, you're not shipping it out. Once you had the equipment and things, was it pretty easy to figure out the flour making process from the grain to the flour?
There was some definite learning curves with that. Proso millet has a hull on it, so we had to learn that we were going to have to separate that hull off of it. Otherwise, it would be very high in fiber. The flour itself is high in fiber, but we didn't want that much fiber. And if you look around bird feeders, the birds will actually hull it before they eat it. You see the little fluff laying around. But once we got that done, and we went through a number of different flour mills to get to where we are today. Now we're using a mock mill. It's a German manufacturer stone mill, and it does a good job for us. It just has more of an issue with quantity. I'm friends with the president of Mock Mill, and they are actually working on a larger scale version using the stone and the motors that they already had to be able to address that. And they're very supportive of farmers milling their own flour and encouraging consumers to do that, so it kind of fits in with what they work on as well.
There's even an international component to this, the fact that we've got equipment manufacturers, but they're wanting to work with farms. They're wanting to help bring it into this on-farm process. That is exciting to hear. Now I want to talk, though, a little bit more on the fun side of this. Okay, so you're trying it. You get your first batch of flour made out. What was the first baked good? And now today, what is your favorite baked good with millet flour?
Once we settled on millet flour, we had actually tried sorghum. We had tried peas. We made this pea flour pie crust that as soon as I ate a piece of it, it was absolutely awful. And my wife asked, well, how is it? And I said, well, you got to try it. And so it's just as soon as she got a piece in her mouth, I was over at the trash can spitting it out, because I guarantee you I could not have described how horrible that was. When we finally settled on millet, I asked her, what is something that you have not been able to eat? for a long time, and her instant response was biscuits. Set to work, and I developed a buttermilk biscuit recipe. Those came out of the oven, and they look exactly like regular old drop biscuits. Nothing special at all to them, and they were good. They had good texture and good flavor. You couldn't tell that it wasn't wheat. So it was able, for a non-gluten person, it was excellent. For somebody who eats gluten, you couldn't tell that there was a difference. So then we went on to pancake and then a brownie mix, and the brownie mix has gotten rave reviews. I actually have a friend who's top chef in Denver, and he calls it the best gluten-free brownie he has ever eaten. And I have some customers that actually think that the brownie is better than any of the other gluten brownies that they've had. But, we've added a cornbread mix, and that was my favorite until just this last spring. About a month ago, we released a cookie mix that allows the baker to choose what kind of ingredients they want to add. And it'll make anything from a sugar cookie to a chocolate chip cookie to a molasses cookie. And we actually came up with a recipe for a maple pecan cookie. And I tell you what, that is a really good cookie. The latest mix has to be my favorite. But at the same time, if I'm going to make a pot of chili, I'm going to make that cornbread mix, because that with a little bit of honey, and you can't go wrong.
You talked about the flour without the hull still being fairly high in fiber. Do you have a general nutrition readout on the rest of the flour and kind of how it compares to other things?
It's higher in fiber than wheat. Protein, it's good. The interesting thing is it has different micronutrients in it than what wheat flour does. Wheat flour is high in things like selenium and, other things that we need, but millet flour has copper in it and other nutrients. So really, if you can eat both of them, it goes towards diversity of diet, and that's why we should diversify and we should eat different things, because each grain kind of has its own, special niche of nutrients that it provides, and which makes sense, because that's how nature works, is that diversity works together to bring in all those, different nutrients into our system. And we've kind of ruined that by focusing so much on just a couple of grains instead of having diversity of all these different kinds of grains. But it is nutritious, and it's gluten-free. It has things in it that actually help balance some blood sugar things and lower cholesterol and things like that. So really, diversity of diet to bring in all these benefits from all these different grains is important for people to have in their diet.
And you've talked a little bit about having folks try it. Have you had kind of a broad public showcase? What's kind of been that general reception to the millet flour?
We've taken it to a number of events. We've gotten some very funny responses. We've gotten some very touching responses. The hardest part is actually getting somebody to try it, because when they hear it's gluten-free, they automatically think that it doesn't taste good. But once you get them to try it, they appreciate it. One of the funny responses was we were at an event that was celebrating an award that my father won as the Colorado Conservationist of the Year a couple of years ago. And my wife and I were walking around the room talking with the different people, and they had asked us for brownie mix to bake up, and whoever cooked it horribly overbaked it. It didn't burn, and that's the interesting thing about the millet mixes is they can take a tremendous amount of abuse and they don't burn. So these people were trying it, and my wife walked up to a couple of gentlemen and said, "Well, what do you think?" And they said, "Oh, it's a pretty good brownie." And she goes, "Well, do you realize it's gluten-free?" "Oh, no, we didn't know it was gluten-free." And she walked away, and as she was walking away, she overheard them one say to the other, "Boy, I kind of feel ripped off now that I know it's gluten-free." And so, they couldn't tell it. But one of the more touching stories was we were doing an event in Denver. I was working a booth representing farmers and millers and bakers, and they had samples of sourdough bread that they were giving out. And I asked them, "Well, are you doing anything for gluten-free?" And they said no, and I offered to bring them I'll bring some gluten-free brownies. How many should I bring? And the response was, about 300. And come to find out, there was 15,000 people attending this event. So I made up 300 inch square brownies. And as people would come around, I'd offer them, would you like to try a gluten-free brownie? And most of the time the answer was no. Occasionally people would take me up on it and they would appreciate it. And there was a young lady, probably mid-20s, that came up, and I said, would you like to try a brownie? And she goes, well, I can't. I just found out I was celiac. And I said, well, these are gluten-free, so you actually, you can have one of my brownies. And she took one, and she ate it. She started getting tears in her eyes, and I asked her if there was something wrong. It's like, I thought it was a good brownie. I didn't think it was that bad. And her response was she learned that she was celiac 2 weeks prior, and she had given up on eating anything that actually tasted normal or good. And that brownie kind of gave her that hope that there is things out there that she'll be able to eat and enjoy. And the celiac diagnosis wasn't the end of being able to enjoy food. So it was really touching, because when you don't have food allergies, you don't understand how that affects somebody's life. And to have those comments really drives home how important it is that we are able to grow good, nutritious food that's delicious, people can enjoy even with different health issues.
How can folks know more about your farming operation? As you said, you raise a lot of different crops. You look at different methods of farming and different things as well. For the millet flour, is there a more retail outlet, or can they come to your farm and purchase it so they can try it for themselves?
We do have it available on our website, which is pfzfarms.com, and we can ship it. People can stop by and pick it up. We always welcome tours. Today wouldn't be the best choice for that. The winds come up, but we do welcome tours, and always willing to share what we're doing on our farm to change our soil health, to improve the nutrition of what we're raising, and to help other farmers get into that position, and even starting working with some companies to help develop markets for farmers to be able to raise those products, to be able to take it to market in something that's more meaningful than dropping it off at the grain elevator, but to actually be able to go to a store and point at a brand and say, our stuff's in that container, and reaching a much wider audience than what we realize. Because in the end, the most important thing that a farmer does is raise food, and we got to realize that everything we raise is food.
Roy, as we look out to the 2023 farming season, anything that you're looking at this year that's new and exciting, maybe or maybe just layering on top of something that you've already been working on? There's
an article that was recently released in a national farm magazine that calls us the most unconventional farmers in the United States. We got to kind of live up to that billing. Last year we had 14 different crops, including ones that we actually are gluten-free on the farm this year. We no longer raise wheat because we actually deliver to a gluten-free processor that malts grains that makes gluten-free, some delicious gluten-free beer. But the one thing that we're starting this year that it has been a challenge to get to is I've been having a hard time sourcing seed, but we are going to have at least 2 varieties of upland rice, which is dryland rice. It doesn't require flooding. It doesn't, require all the water that everybody thinks of when raising rice. We're going to be doing rice, and then we're actually going to be doing a seed treatment trial. We have been able to source our corn seed from Stein Seed without seed treatment on it. And we are looking at different companies' products. And, if there's companies out there that are interested in seeing what their product will do on untreated corn seed, we'd be interested in talking with them about that. Everything we do is we share. If people want to learn more about what we're doing, there's a couple of different things on YouTube with Young's Red Angus channel, where Jay posted some stuff that one of the talks that I give, and then also interview talking about marketing and different attitudes and what farmers can do to be more prosperous, value their soil and be able to increase the health of their soil, and at the same time increase their emotional and physical health which is really what's most important.
Very true. Very wise words. Again, we're talking with Roy Pfaltzgrass, Haxtun, Colorado, PFZ Farms. It's pfzfarms.com where you can check out the millet flour and more. Roy, thank you so much for your time, for talking to us about specifically on the millet flour, but as well just sharing some of the things you're doing on the farm, as well as looking outside the box and ways to be creative, to continue innovating not only for the soil's health, but for the farm's health as well. Before I let you go, final closing thoughts, maybe important information I overlooked in the course of our conversation.
No, you covered it fairly well. The big thing is I encourage farmers to think about their future, and to do that, we need to take care of our soil, and focusing on soil health has made a huge difference in our farm. We have become much more profitable. We're able to relax and take days off in the middle of summer, where before we were always going crazy. Using soil health principles and those different things have been so important, and I really encourage guys that, if you care about who's going to farm your soil next, you need to be thinking about soil health, and that is really the most important thing that we can do, both for ourselves and for the people that we feed, which is our nation.
And again, is Roy Pfaltzgrass, PFZ Farms. He's joining us on the Rural Radio Network. I can't close it out any better than Roy did. Thanks for listening, and always find more at ruralradionetwork.com.